Choo choo. It's the trans train passing through. What's up, Rebels? My name is Leo, and if you are new here, I am one half of Leo and Willie. Hey. My pronouns are he, they, and I am transmasculine. If you already knew that and you're not new here, welcome back. Hey friends. I want to start this video off with a bit of a disclaimer here. If you have read the title of this video, you know we are gonna be talking about trans things. Having some discussions about figuring out your gender identity. This is a big topic. I will be referring to notes that I have with me here on my phone, so if you see me looking down, I just want to make sure I can give you guys the best information. Without further ado, let's get into it. I want to just clarify and just make very clear, I am in no way an expert in all aspects of every trans experience. I am a transmasculine, non-binary person. Ooh, that was loud. Excuse you. I just want to be very, very clear. I speak from my own experiences, and I am not a monolith or a say-all type of reference. I'm not the one and only point to learn from. Chapter 1. What is gender dysphoria? The definition provided by the Trans Hub says, the word dysphoria is used in general to describe discomfort, distress, or unease. For trans people, this kind of distress may be associated with our gender, our bodies, or how those around us perceive our gender, and so is often given the name gender dysphoria. This is a really well-encompassing definition, at least it appears like one to me. I like that they make a distinction of saying that it can be associated with your gender or your body and your particular experience internally with those things. It can also be associated to how others perceive those things about you. Those are two different parts of human experience, two different parts of trans experience, and they can be felt in a range of ways. So one point that I really want to emphasize in our discussion here with gender dysphoria is that gender dysphoria itself is something that can be experienced by anyone, and that is regardless of gender identity. I think that it is something that, as we can see in that definition, there are even a multitude of ways that you can experience dysphoria, different things that can cause dysphoria, and there are things that can be experienced by any human being. There's a variety of ways to experience it, and there's no way to put limitations on exactly who is capable of experiencing gender dysphoria. You can be cis, you can completely be cisgender and identify with your gender assigned at birth and have no desires to transition medically or socially, and you can still feel aspects of gender dysphoria. And I think we need to remove some bits of misinformation and a bit of stigma around that so that we can better understand the range of things associated with gender identity that we experience just as human beings. What does gender dysphoria look like or feel like? Gender dysphoria can feel different for everyone. It is a very, very personal experience that is very nuanced and particular to every person's lived experience in their body and in their social life, you know, and within their family dynamics. There are very, very many aspects. However, there are a lot of common things that can be signs of dysphoria, and there are certain things that are commonly experienced by people who experience gender dysphoria that we can identify as sort of signs in that way. So I've got a little list here, and let's just kind of go down the list and talk about some of the aspects. Depression, anxiety, emotional and psychological distress, anger or sadness. These first few are definitely, as you can see, a lot of emotionally based symptoms. The top two being depression and anxiety are big points because oftentimes Dysphoria can be misunderstood as general depression or anxiety or sort of things that you may feel but think, oh yeah, but I'm just a depressed teenager. Doesn't even cross our minds to think sometimes that it may be related to how we experience the world and how the world experiences us. Continuing down the list here, so we have emotional and psychological distress, anger or sadness, extreme confusion or displacement, low self-esteem, which I know is something that a lot of trans people talk about, and oftentimes something that we talk about as we begin our transition. We tend to notice the shift in our level of self-confidence and that boost of it when we begin to feel more empowered and more affirmed in who we are. That self-esteem does get built up, and then I think when we have that experience, we start to notice how bad it was before. Social isolation and becoming withdrawn, that is something that a lot of trans people experience and go through, and I think it has to do with our lack of comfortability with ourselves and sort of foreign element to not knowing how to interact with our peers, or not understanding how, or not feeling, not feeling like we can fully be ourselves in spaces with others. When you try to really make active choices in creating your persona to be who you align yourself with, and there's elements that you have to actively combat in creating your truer persona as yourself, it's a very polarizing thing. And especially for someone who doesn't have outside guidance potentially, or someone who, you know, is going through this for the first time, or is going through it alone without someone who they can confide in, it's a very, very daunting thing. And so it leads to a lot of social isolation, because being isolated is sometimes easier. And that is a really sad element to being trans, in particular, being stealth or being in the closet, that I think, you know, it can have its upsides and downsides in terms of safety and emotional protection of yourself, but it also definitely can lead to social isolation and a lack of support from your peers and your people around you that you are experiencing, and you feel like you're struggling to fit in your social areas. Firstly, I want to give you a few bits of just suggestions that you might want to go with that might help you out. I really want to encourage you to try to find people that align with your experience. I feel that I felt the most comfortable earlier on in my journey when I was in the presence of other queer and other trans people, particularly people who were in the same timeline as me, who were the same age, maybe experiencing the same things, questioning the same things, or maybe they were like 1 or 2 steps ahead of me in terms of their journey. Having that community and having that space is really beneficial, and it will really give you, as someone who's questioning things and experiencing a lot of things, to have people, or at least one person, who you can speak to freely and who will not even just have all the answers, because you can't expect everyone to ever be able to have all the answers. But it gives you someone who can say, hey, I get you. I know what you're thinking. I know what you're experiencing. And I hear you, and I actually understand. We can talk about our experiences together. And if you are someone who is able to give that to another trans person or another queer person, please do. It's something that we, as a community, definitely use as a strength and as a very good superpower within our community of really being able to support each other and help each other out and join hands as a community. Going back to our list of common signs of dysphoria, there's also bits about dissociation, physical discomfort. I don't know why I keep having issues saying that word, but discomfort, and a desire to alter your body or appearance, or the desire to change the societal perception of yourself. That last point is the most prevalently talked about when it comes to dysphoria, is physical dysphoria, in line with either not feeling comfortable with particular aspects of your body within yourself, or having issue with the way that your body or your presentation is perceived by other people. I do want to make a very clear point that this is not a experience that is felt by every single trans person. It does not define transness. It is not also a requirement of categorizing dysphoria or trans identity. The Gender Identity Clinic has great information on their website as well about gender dysphoria and about trans identity. And they make a point of saying that it is important to note that not all gender diverse people experience gender dysphoria. So that is something that is a very common misconception, and understandably so. In trying to get a more wider understood or a more wider known understanding of gender dysphoria, sometimes it leads us to have definitions that don't necessarily leave room for certain nuances in terms of human experience. It is very hard for us to find language that defines every single aspect of everyone's experience on this earth and everything that everyone can experience. When we find words that define things, when we try to write definitions of things, it's important to know that if someone's experience that you may hear about or experience yourself, if that doesn't completely align with the definitions that I speak about today or definitions that you read in other resources, those definitions are still very good and informational, but they do not define or cancel out any other example that may counteract that definition. We are still in a process of expanding language, expanding our understandings of experiencing gender dysphoria, gender euphoria, and the overall experience of identity within human experience and human life. Always need to leave room for ever-changing human evolution and changes in ways that we understand everything that goes on in all of our little brains that have so many different things going on in them. I will talk about my personal experience with dysphoria. As everyone's experience is different, I want to just speak from what I know, and let you guys know how that's felt for me, and maybe some of it might resonate with you or someone you know, and it might help you out. So for me, dysphoria is sort of a unique form of discomfort. It's either connected to my relationship with my body, and my physical form, and how that relates to me internally and how I experience myself and how I view myself in my head, if that makes sense. Of we have like an internal self, like our soul, and then we have our physical form, and so in that regard those two things don't really align with me. On a separate note from that, or tied in with that rather, my interactions with the outside world and how others perceive me also doesn't align with how I wish for them to. It is, again, a duality of two aspects of dysphoria: inward dysphoria and outward dysphoria. There's some reductive language that gets thrown around from people who maybe don't have the most educated understanding of what it is like to be trans, who say things like, well, is it just because you know,
Are you just upset because someone doesn't call you the right name or use the right pronouns for you?
That's very reductive to pinpoint all aspects of someone's gender dysphoria down to what another person or, you know, particularly a stranger says to them in passing. What we really are trying to get across when it comes to using language is that it's an aspect that can, over time, be very damaging and immobilizing in ways that many trans people struggle with. Many trans people, particularly trans youth, experience isolation, as we talked about before, that can get to the degree of not wanting to interact with anyone, even strangers, even, you know, mailmen, delivery drivers, Uber drivers, those sorts of people that you have the most minuscule moments of interaction with. And even those interactions can become very anxiety inducing, very dysphoric, very troubling for someone who is experiencing gender dysphoria to a very heightened degree. So, I want to particularly talk about some things that I was able to recognize after I came to my realization of being gender diverse and being trans. There were things that I looked back on from my childhood and from earlier days when I didn't have the language to understand some stuff about my identity. And I actually found some memories that related to how I identify now and things that I could look back on and say, actually, that may have been a bit of a sign that like I didn't even catch on to because I didn't even know what to look for. I'm gonna go through some of these things that I went back and thought about and thought, hey, this is something that sounds kind of trans. If you know, you know. I can remember that at a young age, sometime sort of in elementary school, I don't know particularly what year, I started to think a lot about how I wished that I had, quote, removable parts, swappable parts, um, because I wanted to be able to specifically take out like my chest and have like a boy's chest. But I didn't know if I wanted that forever. So I wanted to have the swappable option. Like I wanted to be like a Lego that could like swap out the body. I kind of wanted that. Or like if you can imagine like the flip book paper doll thing where you can make like you choose the head and then the torso and then the legs and the shoes. I kind of wanted to have that. Looking back, I'm like, okay, I definitely recognize that now as dysphoria related to my chest growing and, you know, sort of discomfort with the idea of having a feminine chest. I just didn't understand it at the time. Another thing that looking back on, I was like, oh, wow, okay. And this is something that I hear from so many other trans masc people, other trans guys. This is like, I feel like a lot of us, if you're watching, we're all just going to be like, yep, okay, yeah. I constantly identified with male and androgynous characters in films and TV and cartoons. I got a lot of gender envy from men and male characters and like some male celebrities that I looked up to when I was growing up. In general, there was sort of a underlying discomfort with my gender identity and with aligning myself with my gender assigned at birth. Um, and that last point is something that grew more prevalent as I got older. So I am someone who, particularly from my experience, I recognize that my transition and my identity has come in a different set of stages in my timeline. I like to give recognition to those different aspects and those different times in my life and the different people that I used to be, while also recognizing who I am today. Now, I say that that is a unique experience to myself because, again, like I said earlier, I do not speak for every trans person. I do not like to put any information out there that may be construed as a rule in regards to how people should understand another trans person's experience. I'm just speaking for myself. So when I think back to me before I was Leo, there are even different stages of that. I'm so sorry, my facial hair is coming in and it is so itchy. There's a lot of different parts of my life that I give recognition to. There was a time in my life where I was very femme and I experienced life as a woman and I identified as a woman and I didn't question my gender, and that was a whole part of my life that, although I don't identify with it any longer, I don't necessarily in my head erase it from my experience as a human being who's been on this earth for 24 years. So I have that chapter of my life, and then I have the chapter of my life where I began to question my gender and I started to learn about gender identity and gender expression. And during this time was when I started to experiment with different labels, with different forms of expression of how I presented myself. I grew in my social experiences. I gained more connection with other members of the LGBTQ plus community, and just also educated myself more in my free time about things that I didn't know or things that I was questioning or things that I wanted to understand. And I just did more active research this was during COVID as well, so I had a lot of time on my hands to really delve into a lot of things that I had sort of mentally pushed to the side, focusing on other day-to-day distractions. Still on that journey of, understanding the diversity of my gender and the fluidity of my gender and my expression, and starting to pick apart aspects of identity and understanding things and building that understanding that is made through education and not through what's been told to me or what's been generally accepted. Because there's a difference between having a opinion or having a understanding of something that you were taught by either your peers or your elders or societal rules, or a combination of all three in most cases, versus doing the time to taking the time to research things, look into things, question things with no one else's input other than the information that you're researching. Regardless of that, how do I see myself and how do I wish to see myself? That was the first step that I needed to take in order to let go of some of the stigmas or the sort of labels that I had automatically put onto myself based on my gender assigned at birth and my lived experiences and the general understanding of how society views me for who I am and how I inhabit this earth and the body that I inhabit it in. When you take away that social element, that outward view, and you just focus on the inward view, I think that will help you to understand, if you're questioning this, how you feel in yourself and how you identify and define who you are. Because that is the thing that is most important when you're going into this journey of learning who you would like to present as to the world. You want to make sure that that person that you give to the world is the person that resonates within yourself. Oftentimes, transition is spoken about as a treatment for gender dysphoria. And firstly, yes, it is. It is a very much well-documented medical treatment for gender dysphoria. It is not the only treatment for gender dysphoria because, again, it can be felt to leveling degrees. And so just with any diagnosis of any physical or mental illness or any sort of psychological discomfort or anything that can be medically diagnosed, there is a range of ways that can be given, and there is a range of treatments that can be given to a range of diagnoses. Today, gender dysphoria is still something that I experience, even though I am on HRT. Being on testosterone does not eradicate all forms of gender dysphoria for myself, and oftentimes that is the case felt by many other trans people, at least from the experiences that I have heard and researched myself. Over time, HRT is something that can strongly benefit trans people in diminishing and sometimes eradicating signs of dysphoria and aspects of gender dysphoria. Things to do with, say, also branching out in terms of HRT to branch into gender affirming care as a whole, to include gender affirming surgeries as well as hormonal treatments. There are aspects that can be eliminated through treatment. Say, if I have dysphoria about my chest, I can either wear a binder, which is something that I do personally right now, that gives my chest a more masculine appearance and leaves me feeling less dysphoric in the way that my body feels when I am out in the world. Or alternatively, there is a medical route of getting a double mastectomy or getting some other form of what we call top surgery. That is a form of medical care, medical treatment that eliminates that form of gender dysphoria. As with any medical treatment, it is not a one size fits all. There is no way of saying, if you are trans, you definitely need this, or you definitely want to have this. There is no way to quantify that and say that that is a rule for every trans person, because again, every trans experience is different and unique. There are a vast range of trans identities out there. And so with that comes a vast range of ways people can experience those identities. I put this in to say that we should never police people based on their medical decisions or based on their physical form, and we should never use that as a way to determine someone's transness. I want to include a couple of other quotes that I've found from trans people in regards to gender dysphoria. And so we're going to put these on the screen and we're going to kind of read through them together. Gender dysphoria is something that is painful. It hurts. It's looking in the mirror and thinking, holy heck, who is that person? Who am I looking at? Is that someone that's come into my house? And then realizing, no, that's just me in the mirror. This one, I think, will resonate with probably a lot of other trans people who may be watching this. And I think it speaks to the dissociation that a lot of us start to feel when we experience gender dysphoria in relation to our physical body and who we see ourselves as versus how we look. Our next quote is from Blake, who says, "Dysphoria to me feels a lot like what the world genders me as. Like, I'm pretty fine with how my body is, but it's when I go into the world and people see that I have a chest, and then they think that means that, like, I'm a woman. So it's quite confusing because I'm like, most of the time, it's like I'm fine with my body, but I don't like how the world genders my body." I talked earlier about how gender dysphoria can come in the form of having a discomfort in the way that others perceive you versus how you know yourself to be, where not every trans person is going to want certain types of treatment in order to affirm their trans identity or their identity in their body, and sometimes in those cases it is more geared towards the ways that other people see them and the ways that others treat them and view them as themselves. The reality is, having a desire to change your physical body is not a requirement of being a trans person. All right, we have made it to the end of the first chapter. Thank you so much. I apologize if this was a bit of a lengthy video. There are so many different aspects to the gender identity journey. Please let me know if there are other questions you have. Please let me know. I can make a part 2. I can continue on if that's something that you guys want. And as I said earlier on, if you have any sort of input, any sort of knowledge, any sort of experience or questions even, or concerns, or, you know, anything that you feel like you can give to this discussion, please, please, please do share it. Please leave it in a comment. I will be here periodically checking in with you guys, and so will my partner. So if you have things that you'd like to say to her as well, feel free. But I would really, really love for this to spark some discussions. Love you guys. Stay safe. Eat your veggies. And remember, you are valid. And so is everyone else. And no one is able to invalidate another human being for who they are. Okay? I love you. Be kind to yourself. Be kind to others. And I'll see you again in the next one. Love you. Bye.